Hello there, Leo listeners. Cara here from Leo Listening, where I help advanced English learners fall back in love with their favourite films and series by teaching them how to break free from the subtitles. And I'm here today with my special guest, Pete from Aussie English, who's waving to us all the way from Australia with the world's most impressive beard.
It's slowly getting there. But hello, listeners. How are you going?
Yeah, so Pete's gonna tell us a little bit about life in Australia, about the Australian accent, and give us some film and TV series recommendations from Australia, because there are some pretty cool film and TV series on Australian TV. So it'd be good to kind of know, to kind of break out of the kind of British American mold. It's always good to know what's going on down under when it comes to TV series. So do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about what you do over at Aussie English?
Yeah, no worries. So my name's Pete and I run the podcast, the Aussie English podcast, where I teach people Australian English. So I guess it's really just teaching English, but it's with a sort of heavy Australian focus. So I started that a few years ago after I began my PhD, and I was also learning languages, and I was really in love with French. I started learning that really heavily and listening to a lot of other podcasts in French, and there was one called Français Authentique, which I absolutely loved, the way he did it and everything. And I told my French friends who I was practicing with about finding that podcast and said, oh, there's surely one out there, you know, that's the same in English, so just look it up and get going. We had a look and couldn't find any. So I just decided I had a bit of podcast experience in the past, just being a guest on a few, and just decided I can probably do this. You know, it can't be that hard. Dived in and then just sort of, you know, it evolved and it is where it is today with, I don't know. I think it's like 450 episodes up on the podcast now, or up on the website. Probably not on the podcast, but on the website.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, given that you only started a couple of years ago. Wow. So you're actually Dr. Pete, not just Pete.
Well, technically, though, I don't really go around telling people to call me that or anything. I don't like talking about it.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
You haven't changed, like, because you could, you know, when you get mail sent to you and you have the option to choose, you know, Mr., Mrs., you could choose Doctor.
Exactly, I could, but I'd prefer Mr.
Okay, fair enough.
That's it. It gets to that point where you're just like, don't treat me any differently. I'm not a real doctor. Yeah, I can't help anyone if they're sick. It's all good, whatever. Like,
is there a doctor in the house? No.
Yeah, exactly.
Wrong.
I know. I studied rats. I didn't study humans. Leave me alone.
Okay, so your PhD is in rats.
It's in the evolution of native Australian rats. So I was looking at their evolutionary biology, effectively piecing together their family tree and trying to work out how the 60 plus species of Australian rats were related to one another. So, you know, which were really close sister species, which weren't really closely related. I had to put together their tree using genetics. So that was my PhD project.
Wow. Okay. 60 types of rats.
Yeah, they got here they've gotten here several times. Once at least 5 million years ago, maybe longer. And then a second time, more recently, they got here again. Like another group of rats arrived about 1 million years ago, and since then they've just speciated like crazy. Because obviously Australia's full of different environments. You've got the monsoon tropics in the north, wet, dry. You've got the deserts. You've got the tropical rainforests, the temperate rainforests. So you've got all these different environments. So once rats got here, they just bred like crazy, spread through these environments, and because they're so small, they get isolated and they adapt and they change. They turn into lots and lots of different species within the last 5 million years. So yeah, we got 60 of them.
Wow. Okay. So now we know all about that thanks to you. That's wow.
Well, we know how they're related. Yeah, that's
okay.
It, or at least a little bit. Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. So how did rats get there? I'm just trying to figure this out. So like a rat just kind of floated over on a piece of
Well, at the time, so we had the sea level has been fluctuating over periods of maybe hundreds of thousands of years whilst the ice ages had been occurring. And so they probably came across on the land bridge between Papua New Guinea and Australia, which has
Right.
been experienced. That's how Indigenous Australians probably got here, through that land bridge.
Okay.
And so rats would have done so a lot longer before. But again, they could survive potentially if you had, hurricanes or cyclones in this part of the world, smashing all these trees down. They come down a river all stuck together, the
Mm.
trees with animals in them, and then they just float across from Papua New Guinea to Australia. Just need that once or twice. And that's the thing, you get one pregnant rat to survive that, and bam, she can breed 6 times a year or something, have 12 babies every time, and it's just
Exponential. Wow.
exactly. They're pretty cool little critters.
Yeah, yeah, definitely survivors, rats.
Exactly,
They'll probably be
exactly.
here long after we've gone. For
Um, they're
yeah,
everywhere.
they are a bit. No, actually, we saw one this weekend. I was in Spain and in Seville, and we went to the slightly abandoned part of Seville, which is they had Expo 92 was in Seville, and so they built all this stuff for it, and then they just kind of abandoned it. So it's all like shut.
Yeah.
It's all kind of shut off with these gates, but there's holes in the gates so you can go in. And we went into this kind of park area, which would be really nice if they just were to kind of maintain it a bit. There's like a
Mm.
maze and there's kind of cool stuff. And yeah, one of my friends saw a rat. So I was like, oh, let's
They should
go.
keep to themselves. It should be okay. They
Yeah,
won't come after you.
I think it was more scared. I've seen them here as well, kind of scuttling off into the bushes. But you hear that in urban areas there's like, I don't know, 10 rats for every
I
one
think
person.
that's the problem. The connection that we have to rats is these black rats, the ones that are in New York, for example, and they are filthy. They live in human waste, in the rubbish, whereas the native rats all live in these pristine environments and for the most part are really clean.
Right.
You'll catch them and have them in your hand and they're really clean, cute little animals. So they're really different from the idea of that disgusting, lice covered rat from the bin in New York or something.
I think people still kind of associate them with the plague
Yeah,
in the Middle Ages. So rats are like a vector for disease and particularly
exactly.
deadly diseases. So I think there's still. But I've heard they make very good pets.
They're
And
very clever. Yeah, they're very smart.
okay, because one of my friends, she used to have. She's had various pets, mostly rodents of various types, and yeah, she had a couple of rats, and yeah, seemed
Yeah,
to.
exactly. They're pretty affectionate too. I had friends like that too that love them just because they want to hang out with you all the time.
All right.
They want to be around you, especially if you play with them and get them out a lot. They'll play around your house and hang out with you, and yeah, it's crazy. I had no idea too until I started studying them. I was like, what? Like, but they're actually really, really clever and require attention.
Right. Okay, because yeah, it seems a much better choice of pet than like she used to have a hamster when we lived together, and obviously hamsters are, they're nocturnal, which means they're really grumpy all day. When you try to take them out of the cage during the day, this is why they bite you or they go back into their little house and hide in the cotton
Yeah.
wool. So I think they're actually quite bad pets, even though it's kind of the first, oh, let's get a hamster. When you're a kid, people think of that
Well,
as
that's
a
it. And the funny thing too with rats is, compared to mice, strangely enough, rats are incredibly clean. They like to clean themselves. They don't like
sit in
to,
their
they're not
own
incredibly, yeah, in their own
excrement.
waste. They're not very smelly. They tend to be really clean if you allow them to be, right? So, yeah, they're pretty cool little dudes.
Okay, so if you're thinking of getting a pet,
Yeah,
go
get a
for.
rat. It's like a small dog, just get a smaller leash.
You say that I've seen someone here in the street in Besançon walking a ferret down the street.
Yeah, now they stink.
Right, and yeah, I was like, is he walking a tiny tiny dog? And then I got closer and I was like, "Ah, it's a ferret on a
Just a
leash."
really long dog. A
Yeah,
really long
I
dog.
it's just like I've seen everything now. I think I've seen everything. Yeah, not a rat on a leash, but a ferret on a leash. That was impressive. Anyway, we digress. That was fascinating, but we digress a little bit. So, shall we get back to
Shoot.
Australia?
Yeah, go for it.
So, where are you from originally in Australia? Because I don't think you're not living where you're actually from, right?
No, at the
Or
moment I'm living in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia.
not
And
Sydney,
exactly, nor
Canberra.
Melbourne. So they had, like, back in the day, there was this big dispute, right, between these two cities. You had Sydney that had about the same number of people as Melbourne, and before Australia was a single country, it was all of these different states or colonies. And then when they joined together to form a country, there was a big sort of argument or fight, which one would be the capital. They were both about the same size, so they just decided to put Canberra sort of in between the two, about a third of the way from Sydney to Melbourne. And so, yeah, Canberra's this tiny little town of 400,000 people, but it's the capital.
Okay, well.
But originally, I was from Melbourne, which is in the south.
Okay. Yeah, Melbourne's quite well known, isn't it? Well known for
Exactly.
for coffee, I've heard.
Yeah, that's it, ironically, and the most livable city in the world, apparently, according to, it's won that like 10 times in a row, apparently.
Wow.
So I don't know what criteria they use exactly, but I mean, it's nice, but I would imagine there's better places, that's all. It shocked me when I heard that.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know who really makes up these polls, but yeah, why not take it if I'll take it.
Exactly.
If you've won it. Why not? Okay. All right, Melbourne. Yeah, because I think my dad has, well, we have some family in Australia, but I think they live in Adelaide. I don't know.
That's sort of further to the west in the middle. If you've got Australia like this in front of me, Melbourne's down here, Sydney's here, and Adelaide's here, and then Perth way over to the west.
Okay, yeah, so I don't know what sort of reputation Adelaide has got, but I suspected if we've got family in Australia, they probably live in the worst city or, somewhere.
It's not too bad.
Somewhere not worth visiting.
It's got a reputation for having nothing much there and for the water being horrible. So it's like the little brother of Melbourne, I think.
Sounds like it. And then I think all the kind of new people to Australia, they end up in Perth. Like they like to put people in Perth.
Yeah, there seems to be quite a lot there. I think there's just also, probably an incentive from the government for a lot of people to go out there. And there's a lot of mining jobs out there as well. So,
yeah, one of my brother's friends had been out in Australia for several months, like working in a gold mine and putting lots of money away for traveling.
It's crazy. I've never been there, but Perth's apparently the most isolated city in the world.
I've heard that, yeah.
I think it's closer to get to Jakarta from Perth than it is to get to Adelaide. It's like a shorter trip.
Really?
So, yeah, in Indonesia. So it's insane how, like, we always see the map of Australia and we're like, oh, yeah, Perth's there, blah, blah, blah. But it's actually a 5-day drive. Like, if I wanted to drive there, it's like, I think 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers, and it would take you 5 days. And it's just desert. For the most part, you would drive. If I drove from Melbourne, it would be sort of coastal, temperate forests. There's rain. And then you get past Adelaide and it's just desert for about 3 or 4 days after that. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, it's funny when you hear Australian people talk about kind of travel and they're like, well, places in Southeast Asia are quite close. It's only an 8-hour flight.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, I can be at the border of another country in an hour.
Yeah. What's that saying they've got? Like in England or in Britain, 1,000 kilometers is a long way, and in Australia, 100 years is a long time.
Ah, yeah, it's quite a good way to put it. Yeah, because if you drove for 5 days from here, you would get all the way across Europe. You would probably get into
China.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, you'd be most of the way to Australia, actually, overland.
Well, that's the crazy thing. We're jealous of that sort of thing, especially if we tie it back into learning languages. There's just I drive in any direction, at least north or west from Melbourne, and I can probably go for 3 to 4 days, and I am talking the same language to the same country, the same people, the same culture. And it's only if I get to, say, Indonesia or maybe Vanuatu or New Caledonia that I would then encounter different languages. I mean, aside from the indigenous languages that are here, obviously. But yeah, so there's that crazy thing, and you just forget. Like, I know I had a friend in England who flew to Germany for the day for $50, and I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me?" And you will have flown over, France and Belgium and all these other countries in order to get to Germany, and it was like a 2 or 3 hour flight. And I was like, "What? That's mind blowing."
Yeah. It's it's great. Yeah, it's really easy to get around if you fancy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's true. You would think that linguistically, then, like people living in the UK would then be more open to learning other languages because they're just in such close proximity to all these other European countries. But it's not necessarily the case, unfortunately.
And it's primarily French, right? If you look at those graphs that show, or the graphs, the pictures of Europe, and they show the countries that have like the highest number of speakers of another foreign language, Britain, I think, would tend to be French, right?
It would be, not a particularly high level, but yeah, given, yeah, in school, like when I started secondary school, like half the year we're learning French and half we're learning German, and it was just randomly assigned. And then if you
really didn't even get to choose, you were just, yeah, you're in the German class.
Yeah, it's weird because I had left Scotland, so I was 11, nearly 12, and in Scotland you have 7 years of primary school, whereas in England you only have 6 because the education systems are a bit different. And so in Scotland, we got the forms for picking a language for secondary school, so they gave us the choice of French, German or Gaelic. So you can learn Scottish Gaelic if you want. So in Scotland you get at least where we lived, they gave us the choice. And yeah, when I moved to England and then I had to start secondary school like at the end of the year, which was a bit odd, and I had to do French just because that's what my class were doing. Well, I was lucky, I picked it up very quickly and I really liked it, and that meant the following year I was able to do German, because if you got good grades in your language they let you do the other language. But we only had French and German, and you couldn't do there was no option for Spanish or Italian or anything. Sometimes you get...
What's the state of Scottish Gaelic too today? Like, is that something that they're trying to push more in Scotland? That like, I think I know in Ireland they have Irish, not Irish Gaelic, Irish, that they push at all of the schools now. And so I would imagine there's more people learning that than any other foreign language. Are they doing that in Scotland to try and sort of bring it back?
Yeah, in Scotland it's not really like in the other Celtic countries, because in Wales, for example, everybody has to study Welsh up to age 16, and it's quite, in Wales, they definitely there's a big push for the language. And in Scotland it's still more of like a minority thing. I mean, because it is the first language of some people sort of in the Highlands and Islands.
Really? Far out.
Yeah,
still.
same with Welsh actually. Some people's native language it is. I only found this out fairly recently. I mean, it's a small, we're talking about sort of tens of thousands of people. It's not,
definitely. I know for Scottish Gaelic there's only like 90,000 speakers, let alone, I don't know if it's native speakers or something.
Yeah.
It's a very small population.
So like growing up where I did in sort of like lowland Scotland between Glasgow and Edinburgh, it's not really it's not really a thing. Like near my parents' house, so they live in Paisley, which is near Glasgow now, and in the park they were complaining because like the council spent a lot of money translating some signs into Gaelic or something. They thought that was a bit ridiculous, given that it's not really... Yeah, they thought the money could have been better spent, like, for example, dealing with the fact that the park floods all the time. Rather than, because there's a real problem with drainage, and they were like,
That's step one, get people to want to go to the park. Step two, translate signs.
Worry about the signs later when you've got more... Yeah, so they're a bit sort of cynical about it, because, I mean, they didn't grow up in areas where, even though my dad's from somewhere quite rural, they don't speak Gaelic. And also in Scotland, you've got competition from Scots, which is the dialect. So I mean, it's not really a separate language, but like if you read like the poetry of Robert Burns, that's written in Scots. And apparently that's why the status of Gaelic is a bit different compared to the other Celtic countries, because like people speak English or Scots dialect, and then Gaelic is a bit of a sort of a minority thing. But I don't know if one day it could end up sort of like Wales, where you sort of have to learn it at school. I don't really know where it's going, but I think it's obviously interesting to maintain it for linguistic diversity, and it's kind of the exception in the sort of Celtic areas of the UK. To have the language, and I think it makes them a bit more distinctive, because I think culturally they are a bit distinctive anyway, and the sort of language adds to it. But in Scotland it's not it's an option, and I learned it a little bit at primary school, but nothing serious. And you've got a TV channel, BBC Alba, which is all in Gaelic. It's quite funny
Oh,
to
really?
listen to. You can listen to football as well, and you get like football commentary in Gaelic as well. Although goal, the word for goal is just goal,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
seems to be the word in every language. Yeah, but no,
Wow.
we are lucky. You think languages would be a bigger thing in the UK, being close to Europe, but it doesn't quite work like that. So how did you get into learning French despite being even from New Caledonia or Tahiti, you're really far from the nearest French
Mm.
speaking part of the world, right?
I was doing it at school, so I did
Right.
Indonesian and Japanese in primary school at
Wow.
different times. At different times. So we had like my first primary school had Japanese, and then the next one I ended up at once we moved house down to the coast from the city was Indonesian, which makes geographical sense. And so that's pretty popular in Australia, Indonesian. And then when I got into high school, the options were, I think it was French for year seven. And then once you got to year eight, there was Chinese as well, which I took up. And then in year nine, you could start Latin if you wanted, because I went to a posh private school. And so they had all of these sort of, I guess, European options and Chinese. I think we were the first school in Australia to have Chinese at high school.
Wow.
I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, that was like language learning on hard mode for sure compared to French or even Latin.
Yeah, I love that you actually started with non-European languages in primary school. That's
Mm.
amazing. Do you remember much from
Just the
Indonesia?
basics. I mean, like, and again, it's sort of, I don't know if it was from class or from like, I did karate when I was younger.
Mm.
And then Indonesian wise, I went to Indonesia in my PhD for some field work in the jungles of
Wow.
Sulawesi and had to use a bit. So I probably learned or retained more as a result of those later things. But yeah, I really prefer, tell you what, Indonesian. If you want to learn a foreign language that is in a different family from Indo-European languages, Indonesian is the way to go, I think, like ease-wise, because you don't have to worry about characters or weird grammar tenses and stuff like that.
Ah, really? Okay, because yeah,
Hmm.
we went to Japan a couple of years ago, so we learned like just some basic stuff. So it still makes me laugh when I hear. I really like listening for the basic phrases we know if we're watching something in Japanese or something like this. And yeah, I think we'd quite like to learn it just to make traveling a bit easier. Because my boyfriend reckons that if he were to learn the kanji, then it would be easier for like reading signs and things. Even though
Yeah,
most signs are bilingual, if not trilingual. You know, there's
really
it'll be like in English, Japanese, and then sometimes Chinese and even Korean as well.
far
But
out.
that doesn't help us. But I mean, you know, yeah. So
Yeah.
he reckons he'd like to learn it. But yeah, I think the character that just seems like too much hassle for me. I'd just rather learn some more sounds and some more expressions and not actually bother with the
Well,
characters.
especially too, if you're going to be learning languages, if you want to learn another one, you pick one that's close to one you already know, right?
Yeah.
Because then it's like 80% of the syntax is probably pretty much shared. You just have to learn the new slight modified sounds
Yeah.
and like if you imagine if you jumped over to Italian or Spanish, you'd be like, cool, what am I doing the week after this?
Yeah, it goes pretty well. Actually, well, again, I have learned Spanish, but I've got very lazy with it, and I don't really. I had to use it a bit when I was away, so I can like string together some sentences. It's fine, but I really couldn't understand people particularly well. My friends were like, "Can you understand what he's saying?" And I was like, "No, no, you
Yeah.
tell me what he's saying."
I hit
Because
that barrier though all the time, and it is funny. With French, I haven't actively practiced French properly in probably 1 year now, but I feel like when I listen to French, I can pretty much get the gist, if not
okay,
understand it 100%, or I
great.
can't reply. So I found that I got to the point
Ah,
where I would consider myself, basic fluency, always making mistakes, but able to communicate and
yeah.
generally able to understand what was being said to me, unless it was getting really, really complicated. But the funny thing is, after having stopped, it's just those neural patterns, I think, in my brain that have just kind of like become really slow, or I have to do a lot more searching if I want to start speaking in French again. I can totally, it hits me when I hear it and I'm like, yeah, sweet. But then when I want to respond, I'm like, and it's like you're walking through mud as opposed to water.
Yeah.
So that was funny. I didn't expect that. I was expecting to kind of just completely lose it, whereas I feel like my
Right.
listening stayed high and the speaking's the
Gone
main thing
down.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense that you would probably retain more of your sort of passive knowledge and the active stuff. Unless you keep using it, you've got to keep on your toes and keep.
Exactly. And I think it comes back a lot faster too now. If I spend a little bit of time doing it again or in a conversation with someone or I meet someone and I see them for a week or two and we constantly get back into that rhythm, I feel like it comes back a lot faster. It's not like reinventing the wheel. I don't have to
No.
work my ass off to learn words again. I just, that's right. And then, now I remember how that expression. So it is
Yeah.
funny how quickly it comes back as well.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, we could probably make more of an effort in Spanish to make it come back. But I don't want to like hit the books and sort of study because there's still some verbs I don't know how to conjugate in Spanish. Like no matter
Yeah.
how hard I tried, like conjugation can get really complicated.
I guess
So
it's one of those things though, you got to work out what do you want to do with it. And then
yeah,
if your study doesn't align with what you actually want to do, like if I go to the gym, it's all well and good to be bodybuilding, but if I want to be a long distance runner, I'm kicking myself in the butt, right? Like I'm
yeah.
wasting time. I'm exercising, but it's a waste of my time. So if you're learning how to conjugate these verbs and then you realize, wait a sec, I never need to use these, it's kind of like, well, what was the point of that, right?
Yeah, well, because like I needed them I did a master's degree and I had to do Spanish because it was the only language that I had at sort of a reasonable level, and we were doing like translation from French to Spanish and Spanish to French. And if you make a mistake with a verb, it gets really heavily penalized in the marking
Yeah,
system.
okay.
So what I would do is if I didn't know how to conjugate a verb properly, I would just choose another verb, even if it was the
Yeah.
wrong verb, like even if the meaning wasn't right. I would
Yeah.
obviously try to pick a close meaning if possible, but sometimes I just had to pick a random verb that I knew
It
how
kind of
to
says,
conjugate.
shows everything wrong with the way in which languages are sort of taught, though, right? Or at least analyzed to some degree.
Yeah, but I was warned. I was warned that the system was like this in France. So, like, obviously, some people after that degree they did want to go into translation, but I think they would have been better off doing like proper specialized translation studies rather than kind of language classes that decided that they would teach through translation, which isn't always that kind of useful, really. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, you have to go with what that's the way you get graded. So you have to
Exactly.
you have to go with it, unfortunately. So yeah, okay. So you sort of learned French at high school, and then you kind of picked it up again later in life.
Yeah,
Really,
so I'd done it for 6 years, sorry, and then
right?
once I sort of just decided I needed something else and I wanted to learn a language to fluency. So I had started training at the gym and going to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes and
Right.
was meeting a lot of Portuguese speakers, French speakers, Spanish speakers who spoke two or three languages and was like, I'm so sick of this. I always wanted to learn French to fluency. I never did it at high school. It never got to the point where I wanted it and was confident.
No, I
And
think
so,
that's just what happens at school,
exactly
unfortunately.
right. You just sort of like, like I'll go to class, I show up, I do what I need to do, but I don't really. I'm not there because I want to be there. I don't enjoy it the way that I should have. And so I dived back into it. Did Duolingo on my phone, just to get the basics back. Started reading Harry Potter, listening to podcasts, watching TV with subtitles, and then just took off from there. And it just took 6 months or so to get to sort of fluency again after 10 years of not doing it. But I was probably studying 2 to 8 hours a day, depending on the day.
Oh,
So
right, really.
in like exposure wise, like I would do grammar, I would listen to podcasts, I would watch TV shows, and quite often, like on weekends, I would just binge for the day, all in like Game of Thrones dubbed in French.
Oh, okay. Well, that's quite hardcore. So I just want people to
Yeah.
6 months to sort of conversational fluency, but with quite intensive.
I guess it's one of those things. I didn't feel intensive. It was just I kind of did as much as I felt like doing,
Okay,
and
well,
I
that's
enjoyed it.
yeah. You
Yeah,
weren't forcing it; like it was pleasurable to. And I suppose,
exactly.
I mean, we all complain about school, but ultimately, what you do at school does give you a foundation in. So it's not like you're just discovering. Oh God, there are two genders.
Yeah, no,
They add,
exactly. It was refreshing so much stuff, and I was
yeah.
like, that's right. Yeah. I remember all the basics, the verbs and everything, but I had to sort of build up those neural pathways again to be able to create, and speak and use the language more easily.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think again that's what's missing at school because sort of it's taught in that kind of academic way. Kind
Mm.
of you must master the grammar
And
and
they don't focus on that. Like when I started learning French again, I was like, I'm not doing it the old way. I'm going to do it the way where I have as much fun as possible and it doesn't seem like work. And that was what worked for me, especially when watching TV shows, with subtitles, working my butt off. And I would just have like a notepad here next to me for every time
yeah.
I saw something new or that I was confused about. And my aim would just be fill that up whilst watching a show that I already enjoy and have already seen. So that's why I think I could do so much time. It wouldn't be just sitting in front of a grammar book. I think I
No.
would want to kill myself if that were the case. Although I
Memorizing
did it sometimes.
yeah, or memorizing a word list or something.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I much preferred seeing it and hearing it and sort of consuming it in its natural environment as opposed to on a page in a grammar book.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so what worked best for you? Was it that kind of oral input? So you mentioned podcasts, you mentioned TV series. Is that
I
it?
think so, yeah, especially because I'm really, really heavily inclined when learning a language now to do repeat exercises. I imitate, I act, I listen, and I try and say it the way that I hear it,
Yeah.
just to constantly, even if I'm not having a conversation, obviously, just to be reinforcing my, my muscles and my brain. And it's kind of like, if you watch YouTube because you want to learn how to run a marathon, it's kind of like if you just watch the whole time, you don't actually get out there and move. There's no number of movies or videos or documentaries you can watch that'll show you how to do it, that'll let you do it. You have to go out there and do it. And so as often as I could, I was trying to just use it and, yeah, it was just that constant use it as much as possible, even when you're home alone. I would talk to myself. I would, discuss things out loud, and that really helped. And that's the kind of thing that's really good if you are just on your own or not in an immersive environment. I think you can go a long way just from conversation with yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people sort of complain literally about, having no one to speak to
Yeah.
and things
Just
like that.
narrate your life. I would be like,
Yeah.
je suis dans la cuisine, je vais faire ça. Like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to cook this. Oh my God, I only have 2 eggs left. Oh my gosh, that's hot, and you just narrate this shit because it's the same words, right? If someone was there, you would be saying that I only have 2 eggs.
Yeah.
This is really hot. I need to do. So and it becomes a bit of a game. It's
Yeah.
sort of funny to see how long you can continue it for.
That is a funny way to do it. Yeah, I had quite a long walk home from school. So what I would do is I would sort of be kind of mentally narrating my day, sort of in my head in French. That
Yeah.
came quite naturally, just with I think with the rhythm of walking. I mean, I couldn't talk to myself because I would have looked crazy, but yeah, I used to just sort of in my brain, I would sort of go through the day in French and think about
The good thing
yeah.
today is you can just put some of these in, right? You just put the headphones
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
hold your phone like this to your mouth, and it looks like you're having a conversation with someone, right? I mean, they might hear you if
exactly.
you're like, "Yeah, I've only got 2 eggs and the stove's really hot," and be like, "What?" But that's one of the advices I always give to my one of the pieces of advice I always give to my students is just plug your headphones in and talk to yourself.
That's great. Yeah, definitely. Now with modern technology, you can disguise your language learning if you're doing something a bit embarrassing like talking to yourself. Yeah. Okay, that's awesome.
Exactly.
Well, I think your accent sounds really good, even though you've never actually like lived in France. So you can definitely tell that focusing on the listening and speaking aspect can.
Well, I think, and that's the key. Personally, I always put a lot of emphasis into trying to nail the accent. I know I'm never going to be perfect and I'm never going to
No.
be native, but I want to be as close as possible because I want to avoid as many misunderstandings as possible, right? And you've got those two kinds of mispronunciation and using the wrong words or the wrong grammar. And it's kind of like if you can get that one out of the way, which tends to be the easiest, I think, then the grammar one kind of eventually takes care of itself. And the weird thing is though that it becomes like working out. You have to be constantly hitting the gym to stay fit, to stay buff. I think it's the same with like any language. If I stop speaking Portuguese today, my Portuguese accent will degrade and become sort of stronger over the months. And I think that's the same for my French. It was a lot better originally, but because I haven't spoken it very often, it's dropped off, and I have to think a lot more, especially with the rhythm and the intonation and all of that aspect of speaking.
Yeah, that's very hard to nail in French. I don't think I'll ever get that completely kind of flat.
Mm,
Just coming from English where it's so up and down. I'm not too worried.
exactly.
Not too worried about that because if everything else is mostly okay, then it's all right. But the very flat intonation is hard to get. But I think you're right what you say about muscle memory, because I used to feel physically in pain, not like
Yeah.
awful pain, but
But it was a strain, was it?
after I spoke French, like my jaw would really hurt. And I think it's normal because the vowels in French, they're either really at the front of the mouth or really, really
Or
far
really
back.
the back.
And
Yeah.
in English, you have a lot of vowels that don't exist in French that are kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
So, I would physically feel it. And now for a long time, I've never, so it's like I have the two different sets of muscle,
It is funny, isn't it? Because I feel that too when I go into French mode, my mouth kind of takes this position where I can feel it's more at the back of my throat.
Yeah.
Like I'm speaking from behind my mouth a lot more than I am with English.
Up here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And with English, it's a lot more up in my nasal cavity. I feel like it's higher up in the mouth. And it is funny how they kind of, you can feel those changes when you switch in and out.
Yeah. No, it definitely happens. Okay, well, that's some good tips. Good to know how you've learned languages, because I think I think I need to get back into language learning a bit, and I've wanted to do some things that I've never really tried just to see how it would work.
Two things recently with Portuguese. At least I'm using Anki, the flashcard program on my computer, but I've just downloaded these decks that have like 15,000 phrases.
Jesus.
And it's so simple because it's just blank, and then it shows you the sentence in Portuguese and in English. And you just hear the Portuguese twice. So I keep testing myself. If I hear the sentence and I understand it and I can say it back and nail every single word, I do okay, good. If I can't, I get the answer, I practice it again, I say it out loud, and then I have to see that card again. So that's really good for listening comprehension. And the other thing was using Glossica, which is sort of similar. It's an online website, free plug for them. They're really good, and it's free for the first week. They've got like 50 languages up there, all these rare Chinese, Manx, all these kinds of strange languages, but all the common ones as well. And it's based on purely listen, repeat exercises where they show you, and the sentences just gradually get harder and harder and harder as you go. So, and you just have to review them every day. But I really put a lot of emphasis on that speaking, listening. And at the moment, that's about all I do, as well as just talk with my girlfriend. And, there's obviously no subtitles or writing involved. It's just pure communication.
Is she a native?
She's from Brazil, yeah. So she's from Brazil. So we just, as much as possible, like, half an hour a day, we just talk. And the trouble is it tends to be the same stuff, how was your day? What did you get up to? What do you want for dinner? But that now those conversations are just so easy because it's just bang, it's just in there from doing it every single day. Yeah. But that's the funny thing, because I still go out away from that when people ask me other things, and I'll be like, I don't understand Portuguese. I don't know what they're talking about.
Okay, because you're out of that kind of...
I still have those moments. Yeah.
Yeah, you're out of your little cocoon with your...
Well, I feel like I've got, like, this is my Portuguese, and I'm just slowly kind of circling out further and further, and just slowly working my way outwards into the sort of more complicated aspect of the language. So it's a different way of doing it. With French, I think it was a lot more... Here was all of French, and I was just filling in gaps all over the place and, like, drawing lines between them. So it was interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of those two kind of analogies when it's kind of a language that you had learned and then you're coming back to it and you're trying to expand it, and then if you're sort of starting from zero and just gradually, like you say, it's like a snail kind of thing. You're going kind of...
Exactly. The most common phrase I think I use is "Como eu posso dizer isso, cara?" which is like, how do I say this, mate? How do I say this? How do I say this? Como eu posso dizer isso? And just constantly English. I say, como eu posso dizer tired? Como eu posso dizer friendly? And it slowly adds to it, and then I don't have to ask anymore, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But it's funny, that freaking phrase is just always there in my head.
But that's really good. That's really good to ask it in the language, and and get what you need. You have to go out and ask for what you need and be proactive about it. If you're missing a word, the words are out there. They're just waiting for you to ask what they are and learn them. So. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, cool. Well, coming back to the TV series thing. So yeah, you talked about watching Game of Thrones in French and everything. Like I said in the beginning, I think you've got a lot of cool TV series and films in that are Australian that we know well in Europe.
Yeah.
Even on French TV, we get some Australian
Is that
programs.
Home and Away and Neighbours or something?
No,
Or
the one that we get is what's it called? Hartley High.
Heartbreak High?
Heartbreak
Yeah,
High, yeah, because
that's from so long ago too.
in
It's so funny.
yeah, it's so funny they repeat because my boyfriend used to watch it like 20 years ago, and yeah, in
Yeah.
French it's called Cœur à vif, I think. Cœur à vif,
Wow.
like
Okay.
so like sort of heart, the equivalent of heartbreak.
Heartbroken or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Cœur à vif. Yeah, that must be what it's called. Yeah, so yeah, whenever it comes on, he gets really excited and he's like, "Regarde, c'est tragique, c'est
Ah,
vrai."
that's right. Drazik. Yeah. This
Yeah,
main sexy man was like Drazik.
the
Yeah.
bad boy of
Exactly.
the school.
Yeah.
But yeah, the storylines are always quite dramatic. It's like drugs,
Yeah.
violence, surfing, playing pool, playing
That tends
pool
to
at
be the
the.
whole thing. They always those like Home and Away and Neighbours are two other sort of, I guess, what would you call them? Dramas that are like daily episodes kind of stuff that are still going today. I think they've been going for like 30 plus years, longer than I've been alive.
Easily, yeah, because they're these
Uh-huh.
soap opera style, so they're ongoing. But
Exactly.
in the UK, like Neighbours and Home and Away, I think they're on like twice a day because they have one episode that shows in
Yeah, they
the
have the previous one or something,
yeah,
or
there's
the one from like a year ago.
something like that, or what, like there's I don't know, when I was growing up there would be like one at lunchtime and one in the evening, but it was the same
Yeah,
episode, so you could, depending on your sort of timetable, you could either watch it just after lunch or watch it when you kind of got home in the evening. But yeah, very addictive,
exactly.
these Australian soap operas. But I suppose that's a good thing then, because if you get into a soap opera, because I've heard about people doing this with Brazilian series,
Yeah,
because
novellas,
they're so into their
right?
telenovelas, and yeah, if you get addicted to one, you kind of have to watch it every day after that.
Yeah, or you miss it, right? What do you
Yeah,
say in French? Perdre le fil. You lose the string. You can't.
perdre le fil. Yeah, you lose the
Yeah,
thread.
you have to
Yeah,
keep that maintenance up, or else you just suddenly, I've lost the story. I don't know where
yeah.
we are.
And the stories are
If you
so
miss,
crazy that if you miss an element, you're
yeah,
going to be like, yeah, you're just not going to know what's going on. So is there anything on Australian TV beyond soap operas, or
there are tons of different things. I mean, there's a lot of ones now. I think one of my friends just showed me one he's in. He's the star in it, and it's
really?
the snake. Yeah, the snake catcher. So
Oh,
this is online. He sent it to me. I'll have to link you after this. But yeah, so there's a lot of these sort of adventure ones now where people are going out doing things. Like he is a guy I interviewed on the podcast, and that's how I met him, about catching snakes. He removes snakes from people's houses. So if they
okay.
get dangerous snakes or pythons that come into their house in Queensland, that's up in the north where it's hot, he gets called up and has to remove them. And so this TV channel or something called him up and wanted to do a show on it. So there's those kinds of ones. There's ones like Bondi Rescue, I think is
Oh,
one, Bondi Beach.
I've seen that on French TV. It's
Yeah,
mostly like stupid tourists going into
yeah,
the sea, which is
yeah.
incredibly rough and full of surfers, and they end up not being able to swim back. Just
Well, and
seems
that's one of those things. It's good because it's kind of interesting. People get in trouble, they get rescued. Most of the time, no one dies, but there are a lot of people who do end up, tragically dying. And in Australia, especially, more people die from drowning than shark attacks. It's like 10, 20 times the number. So if you get into the water here, be more afraid of drowning than sharks.
yeah.
But other TV shows, it's hard for me because I mainly sit on the internet these days. I don't watch actual TV. So that I would imagine there'd be those sorts of soap operas like Home and Away, Neighbours. I'm sure there are things like Offspring and All Saints. They are like the hospital kind of
Yeah.
dramas
Those
where
can be
there's
quite
like people
addictive.
sick. Yeah. And then there'll be your police shows as well. Some of the old ones that I used to watch were like called Blue Heelers, Water Rats. So Water Rats was one about police that were on the water. They would have to use boats and stuff to deal with that. And
Okay.
then what was the other one? A really good TV series is Underbelly, which is all about the organized crime in Australia in different cities in different
Ooh.
periods throughout
Okay.
history. So from the 1920s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. they tend to get a story and they turn it into like 10 episodes, and you follow the sort of cat and mouse game between the police and the criminals usually, or the two criminal gangs that are rivals in
Right.
those TV series. Yeah.
Oh, that does sound interesting. Okay. All
And
right.
then movies wise, I would suggest definitely The Castle, The
Yeah.
Dish, The Nugget. There's a lot of things.
Okay.
The Dish, The Nugget, The Castle, they're really, really good. And I don't know that. Yeah, I would just type in Australian movies or Crocodile Dundee. That tends to be a really good one.
It's a classic, isn't it? I
Yeah,
I watched.
check out.
I was going to
I
say.
created a video with 20 movies and series that you should watch in
Oh,
Australia. So
perfect.
if you really,
Okay.
really want to check it out, just look on YouTube, 20 TV shows in Australian English or something, and you'll
Okay.
find it.
I'll link to it under this so that people can go and check that out. The one I saw not too long ago was Mad Max. Finally saw Mad
Yeah. That
Max.
was filmed here a long time ago, though. I think that
Yeah.
was like oh, the more recent one or the
No,
originals?
the original one. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it
yeah,
must
yeah.
be, yeah, it's from the 80s or something.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, when you think of Australian movies, well, I guess that's one that comes up. That and Crocodile Dundee.
Exactly. The Crocodile Dundee trilogy are pretty good if you want a bit of culture and language, and you obviously have American accents in there quite a bit as well.
Is there anything we need to know about understanding Australian accents? Is there anything particularly tricky that?
I think it's one of those things where you'll just get used to the change in certain aspects of pronunciation. For instance, we don't say water, we say water. So we use things like the T flap there instead of water.
Well,
We'll say water.
that's like a
And
mix
then,
between the American and the British pronunciation in a
yeah,
way.
because I know you guys don't really use the T flap, but you use the schwa for ER or
Yeah.
words that in an R sound. We would just say instead of and we use the T flap all the time. So,
Okay.
whether it's what are one of those examples where there's two words with D's or T's, right? Like letter instead of letter.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that, and then just mixing words. I'm mixing them, connecting them a lot, so we contract things down quite a lot. So my advice to students is always try and listen for those contractions and start using them. Whether it's just two words like gonna, wanna, a lotta, all those sorts of small contractions, or entire sentences like what are you gonna do tomorrow? We'll just push it all into a single sentence like that. What are you gonna do tomorrow?
Yeah.
And it just takes a little while. It's one of those things. If you pay attention and you start doing the listen and repeat exercises and watching Australian TV, you tend to nail it pretty quickly. I think the people who have most difficulty with it are the ones who get here. And when I have them as students, they're always like, "Oh, I'm watching American TV and I'm listening to American podcasts." And I'm like, "Well, no wonder, right? Like if I went to Quebec and was only listening to French TV, I'd have the same problem, right?"
Yeah, you definitely miss out on the subtleties of Australian English, because it's true that, I mean, the thing of contractions and linking, I like it because it's kind of it's not an accent thing necessarily. It's more every variety of English is going to do that, but then within
Yeah.
that you're going to have little changes to certain consonant or vowel sounds. Like you're saying, Australian English will use a T flap, whereas in British English it's probably going to be a glottal stop
Yeah.
in the same place in the sentence. And then obviously, so one of the things I hear when I hear Australian people talk, sometimes on certain diphthongs, when people say things like
Yeah.
here, and near,
Yeah. Here.
yeah, there's that little. I mean, it's not massively different, but it's different, and it's different enough to be able to identify the person as Australian. But I think this is it. There's kind of like key vowels and key consonants that are going to change.
Yeah.
The rest of it, it's all just going to be about linking and contractions, which is for every variety
And
of
then you have
English.
slang. That's the part that's difficult. The grammar's pretty much the same, but also Australians tend to use a lot of slang. So
Yeah.
when we speak, we will use shortened words, especially for common words like afternoon. We say arvo, barbecue. We say barbie, and you'll get used to those patterns because they always tend to end in either o, e, or r, like sanger instead of sandwiches. Sanger, you'll say.
All right. Yeah, that's confusing me right now. I've never heard that before. But I suppose we say you sometimes in the UK we say sarnie for a sandwich.
Really?
A sarnie, yeah.
See, and I mean, even I would go through the same issue, right? If I moved to Britain tomorrow, I'd all of a sudden be like, okay, I have to suddenly change what I say and also learn all of the slang that you guys use for things.
Yeah, all that kind of informal, all the informal words for the day-to-day stuff. Yeah, that's what you don't know, and yeah, that can be confusing. Yeah, even for native speakers moving between different regions. Definitely, that is a bit of a yeah, because
Exactly.
people will look at you funny. Like if you insist on using the Australian word, people are going to be like, no, no, we.
That's the first thing that has to get ditched, right? Because you just, as a native speaker as well, I just don't want to come up against problems of understanding. You want to avoid those as much as possible. So it's like a
Yeah.
democracy. When the majority are like, this is the language we use, you've got to kind of suddenly be like, all right, that's what I'm saying from now on.
Exactly. I think I talked about that with you on the when you interviewed me, talking about like my accent changing when I moved to England. And one of the big things actually that changed is that in Scotland, instead of saying yes, usually we say I.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
that word is written A-Y-E. So we say I
Yeah.
or we say no.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that changed first. I started saying yes instead of
Yeah.
I. And that's so funny because that's such a distinctive Scottish thing to say that, and it had to go because you know
Yeah.
it's
Well, you want the path of least resistance. You get sick of
Yeah.
people going, what?
Yeah, it's not that they don't understand either necessarily because it's not that complicated to work out, but it's just like,
It sticks out.
am I going to be aggressively Scottish, or am I going to sort of adapt a little bit, you know, knowing that
Exactly.
I can still use I at home or in Scotland. So
The funny thing is, I had a maths teacher in high school who used to say that all the time, and she was from New Zealand.
really,
Yeah, so I don't know if she had a Scottish parent or if they just do
could
it.
be
And
or
yeah, and
maybe that's in
she would say we as a little thing, a we thing.
yeah, a wee thing.
So
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay. Well, that's a mystery for another day. Don't know why. Don't know why. I've spent some time in New Zealand, but I don't know if I remember anybody using
yeah, not sure. Could
Scottishisms.
have just been her.
Could have
Could have
just
just
been.
been her.
Could just be a completely idiosyncratic.
Well, she's just trolling. Yeah,
She's just trolling. Yeah, she's
yeah,
okay. Maybe. Well, we'll never know, I guess. Okay, so
that's it.
I guess we can wrap it up here. This has been
No worries.
fascinating, from rats to language learning to Mad Max. It's exactly how I thought the discussion would evolve. So that's really good. Do you want to like let us know where we can find you on the internet before we go?
Yeah, if you want to learn Australian English or just, I guess, a podcast that I think is really good for English learners that are intermediate to advanced, I would check out my podcast, the Aussie English Podcast, and obviously the website, the AussieEnglishPodcast.com. And if you want to find me on other platforms, just search Aussie English on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and you'll find me.
And
Just come and say g'day.
I'll put some links. Yeah, make sure you say good day, otherwise he won't talk to you because it's not
That's it.
Australian.
That's the
Yeah.
test. Don't just say hey.
Yeah, don't be all American about it. Adapt. Well, I'll stick a bunch of links under this, wherever this is. The links will be under it, including the video you mentioned with the 20 Australian
Yeah, no worries.
TV and movie recommendations. I'm going to go and have a look myself because I'm very curious about that.
Oh,
All
brilliant.
right.
Thank you so much, Cara, for having me on.
You're welcome,
And
Pete.
everyone, start using subtitles. And if you need them for the Australian stuff, don't be shy.
Yeah, use them, and use them to help you out. That's what they're there for.
Exactly. And then get rid of them.
And then get rid of them. All right, Dr. Pete. I'll leave you to it, and see you again soon.
No worries. See you
All
guys.
right, thanks. Bye.